Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Ryan Parke. Ryan, thank you so much for being with me today. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Lewis. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the TRUUMAN. I'm really pleased to be here.
Amazing. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. And as with all my guests, I start with the hardest question on the planet. Ryan, in your own words, what makes you a man?
What makes me a man is a drive to want to be capable and to help the people that I care about.
Amazing. Short and sweet, but still a pause, which as many listeners will now know that is the common theme, that big pause at the beginning. Ryan, why don't you just tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, fantastic. So my name's Ryan Parke, and I share the science of male mental health in talks, in workshops, in training, and in my coaching programs so that we lose less of the men that we care about to suicide.
Amazing. And as with most men that I've spoken to in this space, there's usually a little bit of a story as to how you got into this space. So why don't you share that?
Yeah, I'd love to share that, Lewis. So in June 2019, I bumped into a lady who I had not seen in years. And I was really excited to hear the latest about her son, because Jenny's son, Brad, was taller than me, more muscular. Some might say slightly better looking. I know that's hard to believe, but a strong argument could have been made. But the important thing to know is that Brad had a fast car, a big house, and a great job. Plus, he was a dad with a loving wife. And I like to believe at the time that I was on the same trajectory as Brad, but I was just a couple of years behind because of the age difference. Then I saw the look on his mum's face and I wondered, whoa, what have I said to upset her? I didn't think I'd said anything upsetting. I just asked how her son was. And she said to me, oh my God, Ryan, you're asking me how Brad is. You don't know. Brad's killed himself. Well, I was really taken aback by that, Lewis, for two main reasons. Reason number one is up until that point in my life, I had always believed that when people are successful, they will be happy. And Brad was easily the most successful person I knew. But reason number two is up until that point in my life, I'd always heard and believed that the reason why men die from suicide at higher rates than women do is because men just don't talk. And yet Brad was the most open and articulate man that I knew. In fact, I found out after Brad died that 2 years before his death, he reached out for help. He went to see his doctor. He said, please help. I think I'm depressed. I know I'm having thoughts about suicide. Brad's doctor did what doctors are trained to do in the UK. So Brad was referred to talking therapy and prescribed antidepressants. Brad attended talking therapy, took antidepressants. And 2 months before his death, his mum, Jenny, who works in mental health, said, Brad, call me every night. Tell me how you feel. You've got to get these feelings off of your chest. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute these things didn't help Brad. I'm sure they did. But what really struck me at the time, Lewis, was here was a man who'd done all the things that we tell men in crisis to do, and he wasn't here anymore. I wondered what else could he have done? Well, Brad's mum, Jenny, said to me, Ryan, you should actually learn about this because every 5 hours, 4 people die from suicide in the UK and Ireland. 3 of them are going to be men. And in fact, Jenny told me more men aged 45 to 49 take their own lives every year than women and girls of all ages combined. Now, that's not a statement about importance. It's just an idea about scale. And I took what Jenny said really seriously. There and then I set aside 1 day every week from June 2019 until the end of the year to learn everything that I could about male mental health. On my very first day of research, I was reading a study that stopped me in my tracks because it just happened to mention there's 1 day every year where heart attacks in men jump up by around 30%. And yet on the same day of the year, heart attacks in women go down by around 30%. Lewis, can you guess what day that is?
I'm excited to find out. I know that much.
So I often ask this question at talks, workshops. I've had so many amazing guesses, but it's very rare people get it right. Often the first guess is Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And I think, well, yeah, maybe if a man forgets Valentine's Day, that could cause a heart attack. But no, it's not Valentine's Day, not Christmas Day, not New Year's Day. The day every year where heart attacks jump up in men and go down significantly in women is the Monday after the clocks jump forward by 1 hour. So this year, 2014, it was that first Monday in April after the clocks had changed. And when I learned that, I had to know why. Well, when the clocks change, when they jump forwards, in theory, we should go to bed an hour early, but I never have. Have you ever done that?
No.
So when the clocks change, which over here in the UK or in America, it's in March. In Australia, it's the opposite way around. But when the clocks change and we lose an hour's sleep, it's like a mass experiment where loads of people lose an hour's sleep. So we get a lot of data from it. And what happens in your body when you lose even 1 hour's sleep depends upon whether you're biologically male or biologically female. In a male body, losing even 1 hour's sleep lowers testosterone for days. And in a male body, as testosterone goes down, the chances of having a heart attack go up. And as soon as I learned that, I remember thinking, that's really weird. Because I was 29 at the time, and I remember up to that point in my life, I had never heard anything positive about testosterone. In fact, when I was a kid and there was a fight in my local pub, my parents' friends used to say, it's no wonder they ended up fighting. There was too much testosterone. So I wondered, how can a hormone that causes fights in pubs protect men from having a heart attack? I decided next week, got to learn about testosterone. The following week comes around. My first research question of the day is, why does testosterone make men aggressive? And it turns out testosterone does not make men aggressive. That was a myth that was disproven decades ago. Just unfortunately, the PR hasn't caught up with the truth. And my next question is, knowing that testosterone is not bad, why does it seem to protect a man's heart? Well, it turns out that not only does testosterone seem to protect a man's heart, it also seems to protect his mental health. Because studies have actually found that on average, men who are depressed have around 30% lower levels of testosterone than men who are not depressed. And the only study of its kind found that men who have already died from suicide have even lower levels of testosterone. So when I learned that, I was really interested, because in the UK and Ireland today, the single biggest killer of men from the age of 18 to 50 is suicide. Suicide in men and depression in men are both linked to having low levels of testosterone. The biggest killer of men over the age of 50 in the UK and Ireland today, and in fact the biggest killer of men overall, I believe, is heart disease. Heart disease, heart attack, heart failure, and high blood pressure in men are all preceded by and predicted by having a low level of testosterone. And the next biggest killer of men in the UK and Ireland today after heart disease is cancer. The most likely cancer that a man will be diagnosed with by a long way is prostate cancer. And can you guess what is the single biggest indicator that a man will be diagnosed with prostate cancer?
Low testosterone.
Got it in one. Yeah, it is low testosterone. So I often tell this story when people ask me what got me interested, because I want to share what I went through in my first 2 days of trying to understand male mental health, because I started out believing testosterone's bad and men just need to talk. And after about 15 hours of research, I could see that testosterone isn't bad. It's vital. Unfortunately, men aren't taught this.
Yep.
And worse, there's actually stigma associated with testosterone that prevents us finding it out. And the other thing that I could see as well is that it seemed way too oversimplistic to the point of being potentially misleading to suggest that the reason why men are dying from suicide is just because they don't reach out for help. When here was at least one guy who had reached out for help, it hadn't worked. And then as I looked into it, there are many reasons why people might have thoughts about suicide to do with things like hormones that actually talking therapies wouldn't necessarily address.
It's really interesting because it sort of mirrors the journey that I went on. I was going through bouts of depression and had suicidal thoughts, and I wanted to talk about it, and that was the reason I started this podcast. It was to get men to talk. And over the last sort of 18 months, that's changed and developed into let's talk. And then what are we going to do about it? And how does that start to make an impact on your life? Because I thought it was just me being analytical and going, cool, we can talk all day, but what are we doing about it? But it actually, based on what you're saying, is because we need that testosterone level increase to get us out of this shit, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's. Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Lewis. You go.
No, yeah, that was your turn.
So there's on my website, it actually links to over 1,000 studies that I've used to build a framework that I use with my coaching clients, that I have delivered in training and talks to NHS trusts, but there's one study in particular that's so interesting based on what you just said. It was carried out in 2021 by Denison. And what's really interesting is they interviewed people who had thoughts about suicide and overcome them. So these are suicide survivors. These are people who, in a way, they know what worked for them.
Yeah.
And the study interviewed them. It was 50 suicide survivors. And what they found is, yes, there's some overlap, but in general, and this is generalizing, but the most effective strategies for men to overcome thoughts about suicide were different to women. Specifically, what the study found is that for women to overcome thoughts about suicide and improve their mental health, the most effective approach seems to be what's called a psycho-educational approach in group settings with other women. So this means learning about and understanding and talking about how you feel. And that's often what we get men to do when we want them to improve their mental health. It's like, oh, you've got to talk about it, you've got to talk about it, you've got to talk about it. But what's interesting for us to know is that this study found that's not the most effective strategy for men. So for men, the study found the most effective strategy to overcome thoughts about suicide is to focus on making changes in your life towards becoming your ideal self. And if I had to summarize like all the research and all the experience I have from coaching calls with hundreds of men over the last 5 years, I would say that in general, positive female mental health is about feeling connected. But positive male mental health is about feeling capable. And there are specific hormonal reasons for that difference.
I love that word capable. That's a really nice way of putting it. It sort of leads on to this next question, which is based on everything you've said, and you've talked about the media sort of side of it. What is your thoughts on toxic masculinity and how it's defined and how it's shown in the media?
So I have a bit of a theory that relates to what is toxic masculinity, which I use it. I'm not going to suggest it's the best explanation, but it is at least useful. I have a workshop called Mums with Sons, which was originally created for mums with sons, but is now used by doctors, therapists, parents, teachers, anyone who wants to communicate better with mums and boys. And I snuck this little 10-minute segment in at the end, and it's actually become some people's favorite part of the workshop. So what we looked at in that is what is positive? What is a positive male role model? And the theory that we talk about is that there's different elements to masculinity, and the two important components are capability, which drives hormonal health in males, not only in our species, but in other primate species. So hormonal health in female creatures is about being connected, it's about oxytocin. In male creatures, it's about being capable. It's testosterone and serotonin. So we know that we've got this interesting difference. So we know capability is massively important, but the other element of masculinity, I believe, is morality. And so when you look at those two elements, you can have men who are moral or immoral, and you can have men who are capable. The opposite of capable isn't incapable. It's a temporary state, which is vulnerability. The easiest one to identify on that matrix is men who are capable, but men who are immoral. And when you show people that matrix, they all say the same thing. Oh, that's toxic masculinity. That is men who are able to do things, but they don't do good things. Does that make sense? And when you show people that matrix, the other one that they find really easy to identify is you show them men who are vulnerable, but moral. And when you show that matrix to women, they say, oh, that's a nice guy. And when you show that matrix to men, they say, "God, that's a loser."
Well,
and
in your scenario, that's a man that's more likely to kill themselves as well.
That's the trouble. Vulnerability is, often vulnerability is shared as like this positive thing that we should aim for. But what's important to know is that, research by the Men's Health Forum have found that when men use the term vulnerability, they use it literally. They look at the dictionary definition, which is an increased risk of being hurt or killed. And if you think about it that way, we don't want anyone to be vulnerable, especially people that we care about. Now, when you hear amazing people doing amazing work like Brené Brown talking about vulnerability, if you replace the word she's saying with authenticity, it all makes perfect sense. But unfortunately, there's a bit of confusion over what vulnerability means at the moment. Vulnerability, just look it up, it means you're easy to be hurt and attacked. There's a real problem now when it comes to, we've got on one side, we've got men who are capable but immoral, toxic masculinity, men who are moral but vulnerable. The problem is, it's two problems really. One problem is young men who are growing up and boys who are looking for a role model. We know from studies on all other primates that the young females, they learn from, they imitate their mothers. But the young males learn from and imitate the highest status males, not necessarily their dad. So they find the highest status male and that becomes their role model. So we've got this issue because often, unfortunately, we tend to value capability over morality, which means that actually lots of young men, in fact, men of all ages and lots of boys, when they value capability over morality, they end up putting toxic figures on a pedestal and learning from them. And there's another issue as well, which is that actually capability is a more attractive quality in a partner than morality. So often when I do the Mums with Sons workshops, people ping me and they're like, while I'm talking, they're sending me a message like, oh my God, this explains my best friend. She has the worst choice in men. They are all capable and they're all immoral and they're all toxic and her young boys are imitating them. And yeah, and where those two converge, you know, the other parts of that matrix, we also have incels. So immorality mixed with vulnerability, but we also have where capability meets morality. That is a positive male role model. Nature is full of examples of it. And the media has a really interesting message. Some people think this is brainwashing men, but I think it might be the other way around. I think that I'll explain what the message is. But if you look at, like, take James Bond, for example. Okay, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the latest Bond film. But if you haven't seen it by now, you don't care how it ends, right? So latest James Bond film, James Bond proves he's capable. He's killed the bad guy. He's fought off hundreds of henchmen. He is dripping in blood from where he's been fighting. He's got his daughter's soft toy stuffed under his braces. And because he knows if he ever leaves that island, he'll spread a disease that will kill his daughter, he goes up on the roof, stands under a missile strike, and it destroys him. So he kills himself to help others. Almost all stories that have a male character in, that male character has to be willing to either die or be willing to die in order to be the hero. So in Lord of the Rings, you know, Frodo has to be willing to die to go to Mordor, and Sam has to be willing to die to come with him. Religions around the world honor and praise men who died for others. Some of them honor men who died for my sins even before I was born, before I committed any. You know, traditional cultures, like traditional Japanese culture, teaches that it's okay if you're seen as a loser. It's okay if you're seen as toxic. If you bring shame on your family, if you just kill yourself, then all will be forgiven. And the message in the media is really simple. Even if you're seen as an incel, even if you're seen as a nice guy, even if you're seen as being toxic, if you'll just be willing to die, you'll be remembered as a positive male role model. And this, you know, in the past, we've even had situations where if men don't go and die abroad for their country, they're given a white feather to show that they're a coward. So the message from the media is really clear, which is if you're male, all will be forgiven if you're just prepared to die for others. And so some people could look at that and say, well, that means males might be being brainwashed. But I think sometimes stories are examples of the ideas that burn bright within us coming out. And the fact this idea of male sacrifice is so present and so appealing to men and boys, I think it actually resonates with something deep inside us. And there's an animal example which just lines up perfectly with this, which is when hunters first started hunting gorillas, they would often always bring back the bodies of the males. The reason being the males would charge them and pound their chests and make a big display so that the young ones and the females could escape. Well, this means that in the process, the males would be the ones who get killed, right? Because they're standing there pounding their chest. They're the obvious target if you're going to shoot something. And when I hear that actually makes the hair on my arms stand on end. This idea of this gorilla pounding his chest, about to be shot dead so that the females and the young ones can escape. And when I hear that, I think that resonates with something inside lots of men, this idea of self-sacrifice. And maybe it doesn't necessarily come from the media. Maybe the media is picking up on a drive that we have inside ourselves that sort of explains why positive male mental health is about capability. It's about using what you have to help others. And when you feel incapable, when you feel that you're not able to help and protect others, that's when our mental health suffers.
I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, please.
I'm trying to think which one to go with first. So something that's really interesting to me that I really want to sort of see if you have the answer to based on some of the studies. You talked about men seeking that alpha male essentially within all sort of species. Is there a study around a level of testosterone or a level of drive where you stop seeing that person as the alpha and it starts to move that into that competition state? So therefore you are sort of bringing yourself up to that level. Is there anything that's ever been done around that?
Oh, wow. And so I've got to start by saying I have hours and hours of like workshops and training that explore this, right? So there's a few hormonal factors that it's useful for us to be aware of. So testosterone is always tracking our short-term success. I can give you some examples of this. We know from studies on monkeys and scientists know a lot about testosterone originally from studying monkeys. So what we know is if there's two male monkeys and they both spot one delicious meal, it's only big enough for one of them. As soon as there's this element of competition, testosterone levels in both monkeys are going to increase by around 4 times baseline. What happens next depends on the outcome. Let's say that one monkey is a bit more street smart and he flashes his teeth, and the other monkey thinks, screw that, it's not worth it, I'm going to run away. Well, as soon as one monkey runs away and there is a clear winner to the competition, testosterone levels in the monkey who won the challenge, his are going to jump up by a further 20%. So they're now like almost 5 times baseline. He's feeling excellent. Testosterone, it increases parasympathetic tones, so it's going to calm him down. He's going to feel very, very good. He's having a great day. The monkey who lost the competition, his testosterone is going to come plummeting down by around 90%. It's now lower than baseline. And what does that monkey do? Well, he will remove himself from the group. He won't return to socialize or even to eat with the others until his testosterone returns to normal. And when scientists learned this, they wondered, well, hold on a minute. If that's how competition impacts testosterone in monkeys, what does it do to men? So they carried out studies on tennis players, chess players, various different competing males. Same things found all the time. Before we compete, based on levels of testosterone, as soon as the competition begins, massive increases, and moments after the winner or loser is announced, the man who wins, his testosterone increases very quickly. The man who loses, his comes crashing back down. So low testosterone in men is associated with many challenges, but 2 of them are depression, as we spoke about, and thoughts about suicide. So this is a big difference between a male hormone system and a female hormone system. A female hormone system is tracking how connected am I, and a male hormone system is tracking how capable am I, how happy am I with my performance. So something I've seen consistently in my coaching practice when I work with men is a real problem for men is setting goals based on outcome. And what I mean by this is you have a goal like, I want to be something. Well, every day that you're not that thing, you're creating a bigger gap between who you are and who you want to be. And we know from Denison's study that that's a massive problem for male mental health. And then once you achieve that thing, you now have nothing to aim for. So it causes a cliff edge of motivation. And if you know anyone, or if you have ever decided you're going to run a marathon, trained hard for 9 months, run the marathon, never run again, then you have a perfect example of cliff edge motivation. It happens. Traditional goal setting is terrible for motivation. It causes so many problems for motivation and for male mental health, right? So we have this big problem. So what you do then is you change your goal. So your goal is not the outcome. Your goal is the effort. My goal is not to run the marathon. My goal is to put on my shoes and step outside every day. You do that for a year, you'll end up running a marathon because you've had a little run 365 times in a row. My goal is not to give an interesting podcast interview. My goal is to have everything set up so my mic's working and my lights are working and I feel ready to meet Lewis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I've seen is, there's loads of studies to back this up, but forget the studies for a minute. What I've seen working with men who are depressed or thinking of ending their own lives is when they change their goal setting in this way, it has a massive, very, very quick impact because it gives them a sense of progress in their life because they're completing their goals. They might not be where they want to be, but they're seeing progress towards it. There's another part of our endocrine system, our hormone system, that's tracking how successful we are, and it's serotonin. So you'll often hear about how important serotonin is, and we're told it comes from sleep, it comes from things like being relaxed, being calm, it comes from good food. Okay, cool. Yeah, definitely if you're female, we can say that. One of the biggest determiners of serotonin levels in species where the males compete, and we are one of them, historically we were, is social status. When men go up even one rank, it can increase their serotonin levels by around 25%. So that's like a therapeutic increase in serotonin. So unfortunately, what we're battling with men is our hormonal system, the psychoprotective hormones, the hormones that keep us alive and happy and healthy, testosterone and serotonin, rely so much on our long-term status and our short-term winning and losing. And so what we have to be really, really good at with men is we have to be brilliant at setting the right kind of goals. So we see trying as winning rather than winning and losing, rather than letting that dictate our hormonal system. And I've got to say one more thing with, the framework that I use, that I train men to use, is actually called Alpha, because if you look at the 5 different dimensions, they literally line up with those letters. And I didn't think anything of that when I called it that. And then every now and again, someone says to me, you can't call it alpha, because alpha males, it's like, that's a bad thing. You don't encourage that. But I actually came at it from a different angle, because what I originally looked at when I first started learning about male mental health is I looked at alpha males in other animals. If you take our closest relative, for example, the chimpanzee, the most senior male, it's not a mindset, it's not a personality type, it's a job, it's a responsibility. And actually, the most senior male is consistently found to be the most generous, the most supportive, the most egalitarian, the most caring, the most considerate. It's not a state of competing, it's a responsibility to take care of those around you. So I don't mind using that word at all. I think it's inaccurate to call any humans an alpha male, because our society is too complex. And you can feel like you're senior at work, and then you find yourself, in a dark alley in the wrong place, and you realize you're not senior here. It doesn't carry across very well. So yeah, that's my bit on alpha males, Lewis.
Cool. It's interesting as well, because you say, you mentioned again, men seek the leader, the alpha male, and from what you're in those sort of smaller communities, their morality is going to be positive. Whereas if we now look at social media and go back to humans, what's perceived as good might have an immoral goal for them. I'm using we'll use the obvious Andrew Tate in this conversation, but there were many men before him, and there'll be many men after him that are showcasing lifestyles that aren't true, but are making them to believe that they are true. What's your thoughts on that side of things?
I think if I use Andrew as an example, I say Andrew like I know him. I do not know him. He has no idea who I am. But if I use Andrew Tate as an example, he's tapped into that thing, which is he's showing such an air of capability, and that is extremely seductive to young men, to other guys. It's really regular. Plus, he, in his Hustlers University program, he instills a sense of responsibility. He instills a sense of discipline, of structure. I've known men who are depressed who have watched the first 2 sessions of Hustle University and decided to start running and felt much better because they were running. That's nothing to do with Andrew.
Yeah.
But Andrew's sharing a message of capability. The problem with Andrew is he totally, from my experience, obviously morality is a different perspective to everyone, but from where I'm standing, it's immoral what he's talking about. I don't agree with his view on how the world works. I don't agree with his view on women. We both think that capability is important, but we completely disagree when it comes to the morality aspect. And I think the solution to that, the reason why the word toxic sits in front of the word masculinity is because masculinity itself isn't toxic. It's a modifier, right? If masculinity was bad, we wouldn't need to call it toxic. This is a form of masculinity that is bad, and most of us can appreciate that. So we have this issue where toxic masculinity is incredibly seductive and interesting to young men for all the reasons we spoke about, and the solution to it is not get rid of masculinity. Masculinity is not the problem. The solution to toxic masculinity is positive masculinity. Nature's full of examples of this. And the interesting thing is that when you do actually come across a male who is both capable and moral, not only does that solve the problem with young boys and men, because look at who their heroes often are. It is Superman who's willing to die. It is James Bond, who it turns out would end his own life for other people. I'm not saying self-sacrifice is good or essential, but what I am saying is that deep down, these are good people, or they might be good people. That is the ultimate for young boys. They really like looking up to the good guy when they can, and actually, when people are choosing partners in life, that combination of capability and morality is the most attractive thing you can have in a partner. The problem is that faced with the choice of capability or morality, we choose capability every time. And it's something hardwired into us, because if you, 10,000 years ago, you'd be in a small group with a very small number of other humans, you need the most capable group. Yeah. And if they're not the most moral group, well, you can live with that because you're more likely to be alive tomorrow if they're all capable. This is the problem that we face. There's something deep set within our biases as humans to select for capability rather than morality. So long as that keeps happening, and for as long as we're not aware of it, Andrew Tate will still have a platform. People will still pick partners who are bad role models, and young boys will still look up to toxic role models. The solution is not less masculinity. The solution is masculinity in its best form.
So what's needed in the space to start to create that? How do we create a positive Andrew Tate? How do we create a real life Superman?
That's a really good question. And often when you hear someone say that's a good question, you don't necessarily get a good answer. So I know what I believe is needed in the space from a male mental health perspective. And I tend to use the term male mental health rather than men's, because men's mental health is really regarding, a gender identity crisis. Who am I? What is a man at the moment? And, these are such important questions. Whereas when I look at male mental health, I'm looking at things from a hormonal perspective. I'm looking at, what has the role of males been in the species for a very, very long time? Because that gives us clues as to why we might want to provide and protect. Because our ancestors who couldn't provide or protect, well, they got wiped out. So they didn't pass on their genes. So they're not our ancestors. We all come from a really long line of males who have provided and who have protected. And they have sacrificed. They grew up in the most unbelievable conditions that we can't comprehend. I can't imagine going to the dentist without an anesthetic. Imagine being a caveman where any dental work that you have is without anesthetic. If you get ill, you stay ill. There are natural remedies that are effective, but generally you're wandering for hours in the cold in Northern Europe trying to find a seal to eat. Do you know what I mean? These people who came before us, regardless of their biological sex or their gender identity, they sacrificed so much. And lots of that is still within us now. We have a survival instinct that tells us, I've got to protect and provide for those I care about because they carry my genes and I need them to live, So what's needed in the space, back to your question. So from the male mental health perspective, what's needed is an evidence-based approach. There really isn't one at the moment. Not only is there a massive lack of research into male mental health, into men's mental health, into strategies that work for men, there's this massive lack of interest in research. The end result is what we do is we look at what works for women and we try and jam men into it. And when men come forward for help and they're attending talking therapy and they're taking antidepressants and they're calling their mum every night and saying how they feel, and then they die from suicide because it didn't work for them, then we turn around and say, well, he should have reached out for help. It's like, I think you'll find he was. If you look at comments on social media after a man dies from suicide, I saw a post a while ago. It really struck me because it really defines what the problem is. It was a post from a workplace who said, we're so sorry to announce that a member of our team died from suicide. You know, obviously we're working with a family, we're working with mental health organizations. Some of you might have known that he was working with, and they listed all these different organizations who provided amazing help. He was in therapy. He'd raised the issue with his line managers. We were doing everything we could. And all the comments said, so sad men don't feel that they can reach out for help. And I was just thinking, read the bloody post. It lists the 10 forms of help he was engaged with. And a study by the University of Manchester, it was a meta-analysis actually, it looked at all the studies on men who died from suicide in the UK and Ireland, middle-aged men, from the period of beginning of 2017 to the end of 2017. And they concluded that about 91% of middle-aged men who die from suicide in the UK and Ireland are in contact with at least one frontline service or agency before they die. And loads of them, I think it's around a quarter, had recent contact with a mental health service. You know, and it's, so when you hear people talk about the men who died from suicide who didn't reach out for help, we have to appreciate that we might be talking about less than 10% of men. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's a much bigger area than that, because this is one meta-analysis. But we really need to start taking an evidence-based approach. We need to get rid of these ridiculous myths that perpetrate men's mental health, like testosterone is bad and men just need to talk, or masculinity is bad, or masculinity is the reason why. When you hear people make general statements about masculinity, it's really problematic, because if there's one thing that research into masculinity shows, is there's no one form of masculinity. There are amazing studies that have, they've asked men what masculinity is. And some of the men have described, kind of traditional masculinity. It's providing, it's being one of the boys. Hey, lads. We know about that when we see it. But lots of men also said that they feel that creativity or intelligence or being in touch with my feelings is what masculinity is. So it's a bit problematic to say, oh, that's masculinity and that's a problem. In fact, there's only 2 elements of masculinity that I know have ever been found to actually be a problem when it comes to suicidality. And one is self-reliance. That is associated with traditional masculinity, being able to rely on yourself. And the other is risk-taking behavior. But other than that, there are many facets to masculinity, and I've never known any of them to actually be associated with, risk of dying from suicide. So the idea that masculinity is the problem, I think, is problematic in itself. Yeah, in summary, it's time to take an evidence-based approach. There's about 60 years of research into male mental health, into hormonal health in men, into masculinity. It's often ignored. In fact, I made a post recently on LinkedIn where I shared 2 surveys. One of them had 1,000 survey participants. And they asked them, have you reached out for help in the past? And the ones who said no, the men who said no, they asked them why. And the main reason why those men had said they hadn't reached out for help was because they didn't feel that help would be effective. And the main reason why they didn't feel that help would be effective is because they'd reached out for help in the past and they'd found it wasn't effective. And I had loads of comments on that post, people saying, you can't use surveys as evidence because people act differently to what they say. That's absolutely true. Lots of people said, well, the reason why they didn't name stigma as a problem, participants could name multiple reasons for not reaching out for help. Only 20% of them named stigma. So people were saying, well, the reason they didn't name stigma is because of stigma. They were ashamed to mention stigma in an anonymous survey where they could tick as many boxes as they wanted. They didn't tick stigma because of the stigma of ticking stigma. And this is the problem that we have with male mental health at the moment, which is, there's a lack of evidence. But when someone does some research, everyone turns around and goes, that's not the reason. You can't take what men say as evidence. You can't just interview 1,000 men, and when they tell you what the problem is, you can't. They're only saying that because of stigma. It's really interesting. You wouldn't publish the survey on anything else, and people comment saying you can't listen to surveys. But as soon as it comes into male mental health, there's a real lack of an evidence-based approach. We find it really hard to let go of our own feelings and our biases for some bizarre reason when it comes to male mental health, and we blame men. We say, well, if they died from suicide, it's because they didn't reach out for help. I once shared some information with someone who works at a brilliant men's mental health organization. And it was a couple of studies that were warning about the limited benefits of talking therapy for men who are thinking of ending their lives. They're the only ones I knew that had measured how effective it was. And he came back to me and said, you can't share this information. It will discourage people from going to talking therapy. And it's like, but share information with people, let them make educated decisions. You can't look at a survey and say, or a study and say, well, I don't agree with it, therefore it doesn't count.
Yeah.
We've got to take an evidence-based approach, Lewis.
I like that. I'm going to read more studies. I have read one, and that's the one where you mentioned the 91%. And that sort of really ties back in with what you're saying, because it led to it being the reasons that these men committed suicide were loss of family, loss of job, struggle with finances, which essentially all tie back to capability, right? And that dictionary definition of that. So I'm going to read more studies because you read two and you were hooked. So I need to read more. Is my takeaway from this. And more people need to listen to these studies that are being shared and being put out there, which is great. Ryan, genuinely, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please let people know where to find you and what else you sort of offer as things for yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much, Lewis. So my name is Ryan Parke. I share the science of male mental health in talks, in workshops, and in my coaching program, which is a 90-day program. It's been phenomenally successful. I really, really enjoy it as well. You can find out more about what I do on themenscoach.co.uk. Can I share some useful resources that are coming up,
You
Lewis?
share whatever you want to share, Ryan. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So something that might be really interesting for people who are listening is there's an amazing suicide prevention charity called the Ollie Foundation. And what they do is from time to time, they put on my workshops and they fully fund them so anyone can attend and you don't have to pay for a ticket. Obviously, if you can afford to, please make a donation to the brilliant suicide intervention and prevention work that they're doing. The free workshops that are coming up that you can attend, that's 3 as in 1, 2, 3. One is called Mums with Sons, How to Have Effective Conversations with Men and Boys. It's really interesting, attended by clinical people, doctors, teachers. There's another one called Connecting the Dots, which is where I share the framework that I created that I use with my coaching clients to help them realize what's wrong and how to fix it. And the third one is called Hack Your Health, which is a deep dive into the role that testosterone plays in male mental health. And specifically, what do you eat to increase testosterone? And everything I share in that, I've used and my clients have used to boost testosterone, to overcome depression, to overcome thoughts about suicide, and to reverse serious clinical problems like high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes. So you can find that information. If you're on my website, you scroll down, there's a tab that says online training, and that's got a link to the Eventbrites that the Ollie Foundation created. I'd love to see you there.
Amazing. I'll share all those links below. Thanks once again, Ryan, for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Lewis.